Okay, we're in John the 18th chapter today, and if you're visiting with us today, why, we're in a rather unusual, unique place in the New Testament because we have come down now in the life of Christ in the book of John to the point to where he has been betrayed and going to be taken in for his trials. Now, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each one tells their version of what happened. And when I say they tell their version, I don't mean that they contradict each other. I mean that they all agree, but you might find Matthew telling about an event, and he takes quite a little while. Mark just takes a small amount. Luke may just skip it. John might take, and so on and on you go. It's just like that if there were some events that happened here today and you get 4 people who were there and you say, tell me about what happened. Each one is going to tell the important thing that they believe happened, and each one is going to give just a little bit of information that the others haven't given. So what that means is that we're going to be studying this a little bit differently than just opening our Bible and going down through John. So far in the study of John, we would just take it chapter 1, chapter 2, and we would go down verse by verse. But now we're going to be skipping back and forth between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and so we can get the whole story put together. Because the crucifixion of Christ is really, really important. And it's time to stop. When you get to that study, take a little time, try to put it all together to see what Jesus actually went through. So that's where we are down here today in John the 18th chapter. Now, we learned some major things last week. We learned that Jesus, when he went out to the garden, said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death." In other words, when he went out to that garden, he said, "I am so sad I could die." He then prayed to the Father, "If it be possible, let this cup pass from me. But not as I will, but as you will, let your will be done." Now, in order for Jesus not to die on the cross, he would have had to given up being the Savior of mankind. In order for him to save all mankind by his blood, it was necessary for him to die. And that is what this prayer is all about. That Jesus is praying, if there is any other way that can happen, but if not, I'm willing to drink this cup. I'm willing to go through this horrible death that I am so sick of right now that I feel like dying. Then an angel came to him and appeared to him. And then he was in such excruciating pain that it said sweat would drop off of his brow and it would fall with blood in it. It was as great drops of blood. The medical profession has researched this out, and only a few people in the world have ever been in such excruciating pain that blood came forth from their sweat pores. But this is what happened. Then Judas came out and a Roman army to arrest him. Jesus stood up, and before Judas could ever identify him, he said, "Who are you seeking?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." He said, "I am he." So he identified himself and said, "I'm the man, let these go their way." And then we found there, that's the time when Peter then struck off Malchus's ear, getting ready to fight. But Jesus told him, he put the ear back on miraculously and told him, if you live with the sword, you'll die with the sword, and shall I not go ahead and drink this cup? In other words, I'm ready to die. So now, last week we studied about that, and they arrested him. The army came out, the Jewish army and the Roman army, and they came out and they arrested him, and they took him back to the high priest, because the high priest was the one that sent them out. So then we saw last week, they led him away to Annas first. for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest. We made a note. Let's do it again. Caiaphas was the real Jewish high priest. The way that you became a high priest would be the offspring, the oldest son of the previous high priest. It was handed down in this order according to the law of Moses. So Caiaphas was in that office. He was the real high priest. He's the one the Jews recognized as the high priest. But for some reason, the Romans were dissatisfied with Caiaphas. They didn't like him. So they told Caiaphas, we'll not recognize you as high priest. We will recognize your father-in-law. So then they made Annas the high priest. So the Romans would deal with Annas, but the Jews would always deal with Caiaphas. All right, this time they brought him in to Annas first, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the real high priest. So now he's coming in, and Jesus is going to stand 6 trials during this night. This is going to be in the, I don't know what time, because how long does it take to have 6 trials? To be sent over here, and then over here, and over here. It's all in the same vicinity, all in Jerusalem. And I don't know how long it would take, whether it'd take 6 hours or 3 hours, but it's all going to come to an end at about 6 o'clock in the morning. So you have to figure out, we are here somewhere in the wee hours of the morning, between probably 1 and 6, that we're having these trials here to see what we're going to be doing with Jesus. So they bring him in here, and then as he goes before Annas, an interesting thing happens. Peter's 3 denials took place while Jesus was being tried by Annas and Caiaphas. Now, rather than saying, okay, let's see what Annas did. And then Peter denied him once. And then we go to Caiaphas. And then Peter denied him again. Rather than jump back and forth, I want to look at Peter's denials. So Peter now, while Jesus is going to be sent to Annas for a trial, he'll be sent to Caiaphas for the second trial. During these trials, Peter came up and he denied Jesus 3 times. We're all familiar with this, that Jesus had prophesied that this would happen. So let's take a look at what the writers say about the denial of Peter. Then we'll come back to the trials. It said, Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Now this other disciple is undoubtedly John, because all the way through the book of John, he never, ever refers to himself. He always refers to himself in such a way as this, another disciple, in the third person, rather than giving himself the glory. So everyone says it's bound to be John. Now that disciple was known to the high priest. In other words, John knew the high priest knew John. So when John came up to the courtyard, let's stop. What this would have looked like is this. Annas would have had one of the finest homes in Jerusalem because he was the high priest. They've dug it up and they've got the foundation and so forth, but so it shows big rooms, and he was obviously living in a nice home. Now, this trial is going to take place in the courtyard. Now, that sounds impressive to those of us in this particular generation. But what that really means is this trial is taking place in the front yard. That really is what it means. It'd be like that if I were going to be the judge, I go out and sit on my front porch, and you bring the guy in, standing in my front yard, and then I will be the judge and you plead the case. This is how this court is going to happen. So, it comes out here in the courtyard. So courtyard, the Jews, like we generally have, almost all homes have a front yard. or a backyard. And they're fenced in. But we don't call them a courtyard. In the first century, if they fenced them in with a rock wall, it's called a courtyard, regardless of the situation of what they do in there. All homes have these. So I want you to picture now, they're bringing Jesus in to the home of Annas. It will be a real nice house. And they're coming in and saying, we have the man. What do you want to do? So Annas comes out on his front porch, and they bring Jesus in the front yard. And they present him and say, here he is. Now, John was known to Annas. So he had access because he was a friend. He goes on in. And as you keep on reading there, it says then that Peter, finally then the other disciple who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her, who kept the door and brought Peter in. So it goes out to the gate, the courtyard gate, and said, this is a friend. And so now Peter comes in. Now, it's cold. They have a fire that is built out there in a fire pit. They were standing around this. It's, what, 2 o'clock in the morning? 2:30? 3? I don't know. It's in the early morning hours, and it's cold. So they're standing around this fire. And Peter was standing around and warming himself with them. So now, as we start looking at this through the eyes of Peter, let's go back and pick up Peter's mind. You try to visualize your Peter. Now, a little while ago, Jesus is going out into the garden. And on the way out, he tells his 12 disciples, tonight, you will scatter from me. And they all jumped in and said, never, never would we ever do such a thing as that. And Peter told him, I will not. I will not. I'll die with you. And Jesus tells him, Peter, before the cock crows twice, before some rooster crows 2 times in the morning. Now keep in mind, let's go back to a farm. You got roosters out there. They don't all crow at exactly the same time, at 5:59 in the morning. A rooster will crow. A little while another rooster will crow. A little while another rooster will crow. Now he says here, before you hear the rooster crow twice, you will have denied me 3 times. That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable for anybody. And Jesus says, I will not. Well, they go in, and then they arrest Jesus, and Peter pulls out the sword. He's ready to fight. He slices off an ear. Jesus rebukes him and said, put up the sword, we're not going to fight. Let these men go. And Peter and the other men took off running. So they've scattered now and left Jesus alone with the army there in the Garden of Gethsemane. The army has brought Jesus over into Jerusalem. It'd be about a half a mile's walk. They brought him over. They've got him before Annas. And Peter, wherever he ran off to, we don't know. But he and John have made their way back around to see what's happening to Jesus. And finally, he ends up in the front yard there with Annas. Now, it says, John says, now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said unto him, you're not one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. And one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, did I not see you in the garden with him? One of Malchus's relatives said, didn't I see you back there? Then he denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. So put yourself in Peter's shoes. He has denied him. He has made this vow vehemently, and yet he denied him. And then a rooster crows, but it doesn't make an impression. It doesn't hit him yet in what is happening. Now, this is a rather brief story that John tells. Matthew adds a few other things. Matthew said, now Peter sat outside the courtyard, he's outside the gate, and a servant girl came to him saying, you were also with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied before them all, saying, I do not know what you're saying. And when he had gone out the gateway, another girl saw him, and comes back again. And he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. Now, denying with an oath is the way people talk today when they say, I swear I didn't do that. That's an oath. When you swear to something, you're taking an oath. People say, I swear to heaven I didn't do that. I swear by my job I didn't do that. Well, whatever you swear by means that you exalt that as the Lord over your life, something that is in control that can cause you problems. That's why Moses said, if you swear, you're to swear in the name of God. I swear by God that I'm telling the truth. That means I recognize God will hold me responsible for telling the truth. Now, people take it lightly, and today they run around. I swear this, I swear that. There's a historian back in the Jews' day, in Jesus' day, that says the Jews swear all day long. And then in the evening, they swear that they haven't sworn. How much that they do. Well, Peter took swear. An oath in there. No, I swear I didn't do this. I know not the man. A little later, those who stood by came up to him, Peter, and said, surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you. We can tell by your accent you're one of these men. Then he began to curse and swear. I do not know the man. Now he's getting hard. Well, what's curse and swear? Curse here would not be the way we think cursing today. Where a man, you go out on a job and vile men, and every time they do something, they use God's name in vain and Jesus' name in vain, and they just all kind of filth. They can't say a word without some kind of filth coming out of their mouth, and so they're cursing. Well, the curse here is talking about invoking a curse upon you. There's another way that we use the word curse. I could say, I am going to curse Steve. I will curse him with, and like some witch, I guess, I'll curse you with a bad health in the next year, or I'll curse you. In other words, I'm going to curse him with something bad coming upon him. So Peter began to curse. I don't know him. I do not know him. I swear I don't know him. If I know him, then let bad health come to me. Let the sky fall out. In other words, he starts making curses there. Now, Peter is really lost it at this time. You have to remember, a few hours before, he's been warned, and he's promised he wouldn't do that. So he began to curse and swear, I do not know the man. And immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the words of Jesus, who had said to him, stop. Remember another rooster crowed? Another rooster crowed just a little while ago. And Peter was there denying him. But it didn't hit him. Why wouldn't it hit him? It would hit you and me. If right now a rooster crowed, Everybody would die. Where is that? What is going on? Because we don't have roosters crowing here in town. But if you have roosters everywhere, and these people did, roosters were everywhere. It'd be like somebody on the farm. When a rooster crows, you don't pay any attention to it. When a cow moves, you don't pay any attention to it. When a sheep goes baa, you don't pay any attention to it. When a dog barks, well, that's the same way we are. You don't pay any attention to it. So it would be like in our nomenclature that a dog barked, a rooster crowed, didn't hit him. But the second time that rooster crowed, it hit. Jesus said, before the rooster crows twice, I will have denied him 3 times. And it hit him. He has done exactly what Jesus said he would do. So he went out and wept bitterly. He left, went out, and cried. He not only cried, but he cried bitterly. There's a big difference. When you're crying bitterly, that pain is all that's on your mind. When a person is crying bitterly, they're not doing anything else. The pain is so deep that they're crying. Peter went out somewhere. I don't know what he did, whether he fell on his face, whether he sat down on a rock. But he went down and he cried, we would say, his heart out. Look at what I have done. Jesus is still in there under this trial. Now, Luke tells the same thing. We're just looking at it now to see the differences in here. They kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard, that is the front yard. Peter sat with them. Then after about an hour had passed, see, that's a little bit more information. How long was Peter in there? About an hour. That's quite a long time to be somewhere in the middle morning hours before daylight. And then he goes ahead and he says, these girls came, and in other words, Luke tells the same story. Then he went out and wept bitterly. When you turn to Mark, Mark tells the same story. Here it is, he said, I neither know nor understand what you're saying. And he went out on the porch, and a rooster crowed. And then down there, second time, the rooster crowed. So Mark is telling the same story that he's telling. And so Peter then denied Jesus 3 times. How Peter felt is beyond what any of us, I suppose, will ever be able to feel. You would have to think, what will happen? Well, Peter's out there crying bitterly. How will the rest of the night go? Jesus is going to go through 6 more trials, or 5 more trials. Peter is brokenhearted. Finally, the trials are going to be over. They're going to take Jesus out and crucify him. Where's Peter? Don't know. And they say, crucify him. Peter's going to see he's dead. They bury him. Peter goes home with the other apostles, and we read about the apostles going, and they're in this back room, and they're sick as can be. Even when good news comes, they won't believe it. They decide they'll go fishing, and it must have been a real sad situation. I can't imagine what all went on in Peter's mind. Now, let's go back to this first trial here that Annas has. Annas is going to have a trial. It's going to be a short one. Jesus is not going to give him any satisfaction. The end result of this trial will be that he's going to send him back to Caiaphas. Send him to Caiaphas so he can have a trial. So then the high priest, Annas, he asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered. Think about this. I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always met, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Why, I ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. This is where they bring Jesus in and set him there, and he asked, now, you tell us. In essence, you tell us if you're guilty. You tell us what you've done. What Jesus actually is doing, he's not being disrespectful. What he's saying is, well, this trial is going to depend on witnesses. So he tells the high priest, he says, sir, everything that I've taught in the synagogues publicly. I've taught in the temple, here where you are. I have taught publicly in every way. And all the Jews have heard all the things that I have taught. Ask them what I have taught that is so bad. And when he said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, do you answer the high priest like this? In other words, slapped him. You going to talk to the high priest like this? You need to show him more respect. So Jesus answered, well, if I've spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? So, if I said anything wrong, tell me about it. If I haven't, why did you strike me? Now, this court is starting to blow apart. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Annas now sees Jesus is not going to answer by himself. We're going to depend on witnesses the way a court should. And he's not going to say anything. So he sent him to Caiaphas so Caiaphas can do this, and it will be done legally then, according to the Jews. So they sent him away to Caiaphas. So it said, they who laid hold on Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest. There. But Peter followed at a distance. So now he's come back around. He went in, he was there, and he followed at a distance. Then he comes in. But now the high priest and the elders and the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. So now Annas sends him back to the legitimate high priest. The legitimate high priest, now I don't know where this would have been. I suppose it would have been over in Caiaphas' house and out in his front yard. It doesn't tell us. But now, he sent him over there, and then now the chief priest, these are your major priests, the elders, the rulers in the Jewish synagogues and so forth, and all the council, this would be the Supreme Court, what's called a Sanhedrin, they all sought false testimony against him to put him to death. So now, he's come up to the second trial and said, we'll get witnesses. In the second trial, we'll bring witnesses. We didn't have any in Annas, but we'll get them. So they brought him up. They got all of these people, and they sought false testimony, but they couldn't find any. Now, we'll find out the reason they couldn't find any is because whenever one man would give testimony about something, Another one would get up and say, give a testimony exactly the opposite and say, no, that's not the way it happened. Here's the way it happened. And so there wasn't any testimony that was consistent. So it says here, the last two false witnesses came forth and said. So now here we have these false witnesses. He said, I heard the man say, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. I actually heard him say that. Now, Jesus said it, but he wasn't talking about the temple of God. He said, you destroyed this temple. And John says he's talking about his body. If you destroy this temple that I'm in, I will raise it up in 3 days. Now they've twisted it around and said, we actually heard him say that destroy this temple and I'll raise it in 3 days. Well, in reality, that wouldn't be so bad in a court. Okay, what's so bad about that? If I said, I tell you what, destroy Washington, D.C., you destroy the White House, and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. What have I said? Have I blasphemed? No. But what they're taking it is, he's an enemy of the temple of God. He said, let's destroy the temple of God. And that's where the false testimony is going to start getting its roots. And there's where we begin next week.